Have you ever had one of those moments where payday finally arrives? You check your bank account. For a brief moment, you feel relief, maybe even optimism. You tell yourself this month will be different. This month you'll save more. This month you'll finally get ahead. This month you'll feel less stressed about money. But somehow, a few weeks later, the paycheck is gone. The rent was paid. The groceries were bought. A few unexpected expenses showed up. A few purchases seemed harmless at the time. And now you're staring at the next payday on the calendar, wondering where all the money went. If you've ever experienced that cycle, you're not alone. In fact, I think this is one of the most common financial experiences in modern life. Not because people are careless, not because they're irresponsible, and not because they lack intelligence. Most people struggle financially for a much simpler reason. They don't have a system. And when there's no system, emotions tend to take over. Money becomes reactive. Life happens. Bills arrive. Temptations appear. Stress increases. And decisions get made in the moment rather than according to a plan. The strange thing is that many people believe financial freedom starts with earning more money. And while income certainly matters, that's not where most financial stories are won or lost. Because there are people earning high salaries who still feel trapped. And there are people with fairly average incomes who quietly build stability year after year. The difference often isn't income. It's structure. It's routine. It's what happens to money the moment it arrives. And once I understood that idea, I started seeing wealth differently. Not as a number, not as a lifestyle, but as a collection of repeated decisions. Small decisions, boring decisions, invisible decisions. The kind nobody talks about online. The kind that don't look impressive today, but completely change someone's future 10 years from now. Most people think financial success is about making the perfect investment, finding the right stock, buying at the perfect time, discovering some hidden opportunity. But real wealth usually starts much earlier than that. It starts with something far less exciting. It starts with knowing where your paycheck is supposed to go before it arrives. That sounds simple, maybe even obvious. But think about how most people handle money. The paycheck lands in the account. Then decisions begin. What needs to be paid? What can I afford? What's left over? Can I still buy this? Should I wait? Every decision requires mental energy. And the more decisions we make, the more likely emotions start influencing those decisions. Psychologists sometimes call this decision fatigue. The more choices we make throughout the day, the harder it becomes to consistently make thoughtful choices. That's true with food. It's true with work. And it's definitely true with money. Imagine two people earning exactly the same income. The first person waits until the end of each month to see what's left for saving. The second person automatically sends money toward future goals the moment their paycheck arrives. Over time, those two approaches create dramatically different outcomes. Not because one person is smarter, because one person removed emotion from the process. And that's where this conversation really begins. Because financial stability isn't just about money. It's about reducing the number of opportunities your emotions have to sabotage your future. Most financial mistakes don't happen because people lack information. Most people already know they should save. They know debt can become a problem. They understand investing matters. The challenge isn't knowledge. The challenge is behavior. Behavior becomes difficult when life feels stressful. And let's be honest, modern life is stressful. Housing costs feel heavy. Food prices seem higher every year. Work expectations continue increasing. Family responsibilities never stop. People aren't making financial decisions inside perfect laboratory conditions. They're making them while tired, while overwhelmed, while worried about the future. And that's exactly why systems matter so much. A system protects you from having to rely on motivation. Because motivation is unpredictable. Some days you feel disciplined. Some days you don't. A good financial routine works even when you're busy, distracted, stressed, or exhausted. And that starts with understanding a simple question. What are your actual necessities? Not your ideal lifestyle. Not your dream lifestyle. Your necessities. The expenses required to keep your life functioning safely and consistently. Housing, utilities, food, transportation, insurance, basic obligations. This sounds obvious, but many people never separate necessities from preferences. Everything gets blended together. As a result, financial decisions become emotionally confusing. When everything feels essential, nothing gets prioritized correctly. And when people finally sit down and identify true necessities, something interesting usually happens. They discover that a surprising amount of spending isn't actually supporting survival. It's supporting convenience, comfort, entertainment, identity. None of those things are inherently bad, but they become easier to manage when they're recognized honestly. Because clarity creates control, and control reduces stress. Once necessities are covered, another important piece enters the picture. Credit. Now, credit often creates strong emotions. Some people fear it completely. Others ignore it entirely. But credit is really just a tool. Like any tool, its usefulness depends on how it's managed. A healthy credit profile doesn't make someone wealthy, but it can make life smoother. It can lower borrowing costs, improve opportunities, create flexibility during important life moments. The problem is that many people view credit as additional income, and that's where trouble begins. Credit can temporarily increase spending power, but it doesn't increase actual wealth. In fact, using future income to fund present consumption often creates financial pressure later, because eventually the bill arrives, and future income already has enough responsibilities waiting for it. That's why one of the most underrated financial habits is creating distance between spending ability and spending behavior. Just because you can buy something doesn't automatically mean it's helping your future. That distinction becomes incredibly important over time, especially when life becomes unpredictable. And life always becomes unpredictable eventually. A medical expense, a job transition, a car repair, an unexpected family situation. Financial emergencies rarely send advance notices. They simply appear, which brings us to something many people underestimate until they need it. An emergency fund. Now, I know emergency funds aren't exciting. Nobody brags about them online. Nobody posts screenshots of the months they didn't have a crisis because they prepared in advance. But emergency funds create something incredibly valuable. They create emotional breathing room. Think about the difference between facing a $1,000 surprise expense with savings versus without savings. The expense is the same, but the emotional experience is completely different. One situation feels manageable. The other can feel overwhelming. That's because money isn't just practical. It's psychological. Savings don't only protect finances. They protect peace of mind. And peace of mind has tremendous value. The interesting thing is that many people delay building emergency savings because investing sounds more exciting. Investing feels productive. Growth feels exciting. Emergency funds feel slow. But stability often comes before growth. Just like a house needs a foundation before additional floors are added, financial progress usually works best when stability comes first. Once stability exists, something interesting happens. The focus can finally shift from protection to growth. And this is where many people begin thinking about investing. Unfortunately, investing often feels intimidating. Not because it's inherently complicated, but because it's surrounded by noise. Everywhere you look, someone seems to be talking about the next opportunity, the next stock, the next trend, the next thing that's supposedly going to create wealth quickly. But historically, many of the most successful investors built wealth through something much less exciting. Consistency, diversification, patience, not dramatic predictions, not constant trading, just repeated contributions over long periods of time. One of the most powerful examples of this is employer retirement matching. It's interesting how often people overlook this, partly because retirement feels far away, especially when immediate expenses feel much closer. But imagine someone offering to increase part of your investment contribution simply because you participate. That's essentially what many employer matches do. It's one of the few situations where preparation for the future receives immediate reinforcement. Yet many people leave that opportunity untouched because today's problems feel more urgent than tomorrow's opportunities. And that's understandable. Human beings naturally prioritize immediate concerns. Psychologists call this present bias. We place greater emotional importance on things happening now than things happening later. The challenge is that wealth creation largely depends on future-focused decisions. Not because the future is guaranteed, but because time itself becomes one of the most powerful financial tools available. This is where compound interest enters the conversation. And compound interest is fascinating because it often feels invisible in the beginning. Progress appears slow, almost disappointingly slow, which is why so many people quit early. Imagine planting a tree. For months, it doesn't seem impressive. You water it, protect it, wait. Nothing dramatic happens. But years later, that same tree becomes something completely different. Investing often works the same way. The early years require patience. The later years reveal why patience mattered. People frequently underestimate how much progress happens because of time rather than because of extraordinary returns. The longer money remains invested, the more opportunities it has to grow upon previous growth. That's the essence of compounding. Small gains building upon earlier gains. Repeated over years. Repeated over decades. And eventually creating outcomes that seem surprising to people who only focus on income. Because here's something many people miss. A high salary can improve life significantly. But a high salary without structure often disappears surprisingly quickly. Meanwhile, a moderate salary combined with discipline, automation, and patience can create substantial financial stability over time. That's not because income doesn't matter. It absolutely does. It's because income and wealth are not the same thing. Income is what comes in. Wealth is what stays. And what stays is usually determined by habits. Which brings us to one of the most powerful ideas in personal finance. Automation. Automation sounds boring. But boring is often incredibly effective. Because automation removes negotiation. It removes excuses. It removes emotional decision-making. Imagine if every payday automatically directed money toward necessities, emergency savings, retirement contributions, and long-term investments before you ever saw it. How many difficult decisions would disappear? How much mental energy would be saved? How much progress would happen simply because the system kept working? The beauty of automation is that it allows good decisions to happen repeatedly without requiring constant discipline. And discipline is a limited resource. Some days we have more of it than others. Systems don't have that problem. Systems simply continue. Quietly. Consistently. Month after month. Year after year. This is why many financially successful people aren't necessarily more motivated than everyone else. They've simply built structures that support the behaviors they want. And those structures continue functioning even when life becomes chaotic. That's an important distinction, because many people assume wealth builders possess extraordinary willpower. Often they don't. They've simply reduced the number of opportunities available for poor decisions. And honestly, that's something almost anyone can learn. The turning point comes when you stop viewing money as something that should be managed occasionally, and start viewing it as something that benefits from a routine. Just like health benefits from routine. Relationships benefit from routine. Work benefits from routine. Money benefits from routine too. A routine creates predictability. Predictability creates confidence. Confidence reduces anxiety. And reduced anxiety makes better decisions possible. Suddenly, the paycheck isn't something that arrives and disappears mysteriously. It becomes a tool with specific assignments. Necessities receive attention. Savings receive attention. Investments receive attention. Future goals receive attention. Not because you're perfect, because the system makes progress easier. And that's really what financial routines are about. Making good decisions easier. Not making life restrictive. Not eliminating enjoyment. Not obsessing over every dollar. Simply creating enough structure that your future receives attention alongside your present. Because both matter. You deserve to enjoy your life today, but your future self deserves consideration too. The balance between those two realities is where long-term financial stability usually lives. And maybe that's the biggest lesson here. Financial freedom rarely arrives through a single decision. It arrives through repeated decisions. Small choices repeated consistently. A routine repeated often enough that it becomes normal. An emergency fund built one contribution at a time. Investments growing one deposit at a time. Habits strengthening one paycheck at a time. None of these actions look dramatic. Most of them look ordinary. But ordinary actions repeated consistently create extraordinary outcomes. Not overnight. Not next month. But over time. And that's actually good news. Because it means financial progress isn't reserved for people with perfect circumstances. It isn't reserved only for people with massive salaries. It isn't reserved for people who never make mistakes. It's available to people willing to build systems. People willing to create structure. People willing to let time work alongside their effort. So if you've ever felt behind financially, remember this. You don't need to solve your entire financial future this week. You don't need the perfect plan. You don't need perfect discipline. You just need a system that consistently moves you in the right direction. A little progress repeated over time becomes meaningful progress. And meaningful progress repeated over years becomes something even more valuable. Not just wealth, peace of mind. Because at the end of the day, financial freedom isn't really about having unlimited money. It's about having enough stability that money stops controlling every thought, every decision, and every source of stress. And that kind of freedom is usually built quietly. One paycheck at a time, one habit at a time, one intentional decision at a time. And that's worth remembering. Because progress has never required perfection. It only requires consistency. Before you go, I want to ask you something simple but important. Do you already use an automatic system to sort your paycheck the moment it arrives? Not what you plan to do, not what you wish you were doing, but what actually happens right now. Because if your money still depends on manual decisions every payday, then your emotions are still in charge more than your system is. So tell me in the comments, are you already automating your paycheck, or are you still managing everything manually? Subscribe to Weston Wealth channel if you want to see the next money breakdown. I will see you in my next video.